Coronavirus is ravaging Brazil, though the death and case totals might be even worse, with the Bolsonaro administration suppressing the actual figures. The country's Supreme Court called the move a, quote, tactic of totalitarian regimes and ordered the government to correctly report those figures.
So this caused military figures in Brazil to threaten possible intervention to protect Bolsonaro's power. The Intercept's co-founding editor, Glenn Greenwald, has been following the story closely, and he joins us now via Skype.
He's been living the story,
literally. I was going to say living the story in this particular case. Glenn, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you guys.
So, Glenn, give us just an update on the ground from the situation, what we know about these military threats. How seriously should we evaluate these claims given the Bolsonaro regime's past actions?
Well, obviously, Bolsonaro himself has been somebody who, prior to being elected president, has been a longtime advocate of military dictatorship. He was in the army when the military ruled the country after a U.S.-supported coup in 1964, removed the democratically elected leader, and then for the 21 years that followed, a brutal military regime that he has always argued was a superior form of government to the democracy that followed in 1985. So there's always a threat to Brazilian democracy when you have a president who doesn't believe in democracy, who explicitly says that he thought the military regime was a superior form of government. And what you have in the last 4 to 5 months is a complete breakdown of any kind of Republican form of government, in some part ushered in by his incredibly unhinged and unstable reaction to the coronavirus. It's well documented that he mocked it, that he encouraged people to ignore isolation, that he himself, when people thought that he had the coronavirus, was diving into crowds, touching people with no distancing, no precautions, essentially mocking the idea that this was anything to worry about, as the country has now plunged into what really become the epicenter of the pandemic. And then beyond that, what you have is a lot of other institutions like the Supreme Court, like the Congress, like the media, sort of like we're seeing in the United States with regard to how other institutions have responded to Donald Trump, responding to Bolsonaro by trying to oppose him. The Supreme Court constantly invalidating his decisions as unconstitutional, the Congress refusing to enact legislation that he approves of, the media being extremely critical. And obviously, if you want to be a dictator, by definition, you need to make sure that there are no other institutions that are free and democratic in order to oppose and impede what it is that you want to do. And so you have on the one hand this bizarre spectacle of a democratically elected president who doesn't believe in democracy. And now the question has become, in this war between all the other institutions on the one hand and Bolsonaro on the other, who is the military going to side with? And the minute you start asking, what does the military think? What does the military want? What will the military do? Already democracy is imperiled if the fate of the country is in the hands not of voters and not of the courts, but in the hands of generals.
Well, and what do you think the answer is to that question? What would the military do? Who would they side with?
Well, it's very hard to know, because one of the prime values with which the military and these generals have been inculcated since redemocratization in 1985 is that never again can you allow the military to become the adversary of democracy. And so the idea was always, just like in the United States, and in Europe, that the military has to be apolitical. It has to stay out of politics. It's there to defend the country from foreign invaders. It's there to keep the public order, but it's not there to dictate domestic politics. And so for years, they've abided by that. And this new generation of generals have been instilled with those values. So we haven't heard much from them. They're kind of these shadowy figures who don't really express themselves very often. What's disturbing is that Bolsonaro has integrated the military into his government so much that there are now more generals serving in key government positions than even was true during the military dictatorship itself. So he's aligned himself and aligned the military with him. And there are generals, there's clearly radical factions within the military who are making increasingly clear that they would side with Bolsonaro against any attempts to limit or impose what he wants to do. The question is, how pervasive is that attitude within the military? Are there still powerful factions within the military committed to defending democratic values against infringement by Bolsonaro? These are questions to which no one really knows the answer.
Yeah, and Glenn, just you personally, how seriously do you take this threat as somebody who lives there, and how are the citizens there grappling with the idea that things could be radically changing in this time?
I mean, I take the threat very seriously. I mean, I take it very seriously for personal reasons. For one thing, my husband is a member of Congress from a left-wing socialist party that Bolsonaro hates most, that he blames for his stabbing very irrationally. The person who stabbed him during the campaign and almost killed him had been a affiliated member of that party years ago, but every court and every investigation concluded that he acted alone, that he was psychologically disturbed. But he does blame that party. And the military regime itself, one of the things that they did was they attacked left-wing socialist politicians. They imprisoned them, they killed them, they exiled them. On top of which, because of the reporting we did last year, Bolsonaro repeatedly threatened me with prison. We became the primary enemy of that movement. There's still an attempt by the Bolsonaro government to imprison me. The court in the first instance rejected the attempt, but they appealed that. And so that's now pending before an appellate court. So obviously the need to have an independent judiciary has been crucial to my ability not to be jailed. The ability to have a democratically elected Congress is important for my husband and his safety and his liberty. So these things affect us very personally. And we do believe, especially with the coronavirus causing every country to turn inward, that there's a lot of danger, as we saw in Hungary with Orban and other places as well, of rising authoritarianism, because the checks internationally were already weak in the first place, but they're even weaker still. So yeah, the situation is definitely very dangerous.
Well, and one of the things that you pointed out very early on in the coronavirus crisis that I hadn't really fully thought through is, the way that it really hinders your ability to protest, to dissent, to get out in the streets, increases just as a natural matter of course, the sort of government restrictions, the amount of surveillance. So how has that played into the dissent and the popular sentiment around what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, one of the disturbing parts of this is that there's become this kind of ideological divide. At least there was until 2 weeks ago when these anti-police brutality protests erupted, where people on the left were saying, we believe in quarantine, we believe in isolation, we're not going to leave our homes under any circumstances. Whereas people on the right were saying, no, we don't think we think that's an overreaction. We're going to go out on the streets. We're going to protest. And so there was this imbalance. And I did really worry, and still do really worry, that the fact that there is still a pandemic, by the way, obviously impedes the ability of a citizenry to stand up to a power center because of the need to take precautions, the need of a lot of people who are still afraid to leave their homes. It has weakened a crucial check on political power, which is the ability of the citizenry to join together and rise up. We're seeing in the United States that some people reach the point where they say, you know what, we don't care anymore. Maybe they're tired of being cooped up in their house for 4 months. Maybe they're just frustrated and angry, or maybe they conclude that the cause is sufficiently worth it. I actually find that encouraging in the sense that even in a pandemic, people are willing to risk their health in order to pursue political causes that they believe in.
Yeah, well, very important to keep in mind. Thank you, Glenn, for the update, and we wish you, of course,
all right, guys, thanks so much.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks.
More Rising for you after this.